Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Walters Wanderings Travel Podcast. I'm Scott Walters. I'll be joined by my guest in just a second, but first, I want to tell you about my current special, and that is last minute getaways. With holiday weekends coming and such like that, you might not have made a plan to go away, but there are several places you can go that are safe, especially if we keep you in the state you live in or adjacent states. Usually we have these bubbles around that actually work. There's some great things going on up at Lake George in New York. You can always visit historical places like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Boston, from New York, and go to those kind of places. You can even take a little off-season time at Cape May or somewhere like that. So get in touch to go away. We have special offerings on all kinds of things. But right now, I want to bring in my friend, Jason Thoms. Here he comes. Ta-da, here he is, all the way from North Dakota. Hello, Jason. How are you today?
I'm not hearing you, Scott.
You're not hearing me? Turn me up.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine. Somehow you have to turn me up, I suppose. The frailties of technology.
There we go.
All right.
I was trying to use my mic that I have in my office, but it wouldn't let me hear you again. So.
Oh, there we go. So we're all good.
All right.
So now, Jason, tell us what you're doing right now, and then we'll get back into your background, so that we can talk about travel-related things that have happened in your life that are interesting, humorous, or maybe even just mundane and boring.
That's right. Well, I'm the director of choral activities now at Bismarck State College in Bismarck, North Dakota, and I also direct a community chamber choral ensemble called the Dakota Pro Musica. And I also do a radio show here in North Dakota about choral music in North Dakota, which is called Dakota Sings. So have a variety of things that I am involved with. And I've been doing choral music and choral directing for over 25 years. So it's definitely part of what I do.
It's a vocation. It's not just a job.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think I could do almost anything else at this point. So,
well, I understand how that goes sometimes. So, but you've also done singing performances. You've gone and done solo things, and you've done opera things, and you've done choral solo work and all that kind of stuff. So, what is the most interesting place you've ever sung at, based on, shall we say, history, acoustics, or whatever you want to go ahead, whatever criteria you want to put on it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I mean, I've traveled all over the place. I've been to Australia and New Zealand. I've been to the Marshall Islands. I've been to Hawaii. I've been to a lot of the European countries. Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, Germany. I lived in Scotland for a while. I've been in England. All these things were done through music, through being connected to music. So probably the most interesting place, just kind of unique, that's always in my memory, is the Marshall Islands, which is pretty much in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And when you fly from Los Angeles to Hawaii, and you fly there for 5 hours to get to Hawaii, and then you get on a smaller plane and you drive for 5 hours, or fly for 5 hours straight out into the middle of the ocean, and you don't ever see another piece of land. And as you're landing in the Marshall Islands, which are atolls, so they're kind of, maybe full circles, or maybe like a letter C. They're just like wreaths that are above the water, and they've built cities on that. And I was in Majuro, and as you're landing on Majuro, the plane's going down, 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 and you look out both sides of the airplane, and all you see is ocean. And then suddenly the wheels hit, because the island is only as wide as at that point as the landing strip. So that was a little crazy, and
not for the faint of heart.
No, but then also the Marshall Islands is about as a third world country as you would have ever imagined being in. I was co-teaching a class there on how to teach teachers in the Marshall Islands to use music in their elementary school classrooms. And many of these folks came from other islands in the Marshall Islands, and they came in a boat that we would have just considered a boat that we would maybe use on vacation, from a marina, that we would just go out and with one little motor in the back, and we would drive out for a mile and go fish for a while and come back home. They were riding that for 6, 7, 8 hours overnight to go from one island through the ocean to the Majuro on a regular motorboat. So and the majority of the population in the Marshall Islands, 75% of the population of the island is under 18, because that was also Bikini Island is probably, we all heard of Bikini Island, maybe from SpongeBob, but it's also where America tested nuclear bombs. And Bikini Island is part of the Marshall Island system, and you can't even go on it anymore. And a number of years ago, in the 50s, and I believe it was in the 50s, they tested some nuclear bomb there, and they were told to not test the bomb that day because the winds were changing, and they did anyway, the Americans, and the fallout landed on Majuro and some of the other islands and ended up killing the majority of their population. So there's very few elders left in those islands. It's mostly young folks and children, and you'll often see just the streets filled with chickens and children. It's a very different place, and it makes you realize that the world is very different when you leave the confines of the kind of civilized Western world. There's suddenly a very different world out there.
And the Marshall Islands, I think, is still a U.S. protectorate, so we actually sort of run the place administratively.
Right. We're part of. We oversee the Marshall Islands, and in fact, if you go to Springdale, Arkansas, which is near Fayetteville, they have the largest Marshallese population on the mainland of America, and lots of folks in the Marshall Islands would always talk about how much they wanted to move to Arkansas. So kind of interesting.
Well, there you go. That's pretty interesting stuff, no doubt.
Yeah.
So now, in all of your travels, obviously flying into the Marshall Islands is pretty harrowing. My wife certainly would not ever want to fly into the Marshall Islands, I can assure you. Do you have an interesting travel story, say, to get to a singing job, or to get from a singing job? Were you ever like stranded in a blizzard or anything like that?
Well, I've been pretty lucky with that kind of stuff. I tend to want to make sure I think about pretty in depth about what I'm doing. Probably the most crazy time we've ever had was actually, I was on choir tour with my choir from New York, and we did a tour of the West Coast. And so we had about 20, almost 30 of us on that tour. And we flew into Las Vegas, and we got a tour bus there in Las Vegas, and we went down to Phoenix, over to San Diego, all the way up to Seattle, over to Missoula, Montana.
Wow.
And all the way back down to Vegas over about 2.5 weeks, giving a concert every night. We got to see the desert and, the tropical zones of like San Diego and the redwood forests of north of San Francisco. We got to see the petrified forests of eastern Washington state and the almost moonscape of Idaho. And so after 2.5 weeks with 30 college students, we had a free day in Vegas. And
oh boy,
I said to the students, "Say, just be alive when we meet for the bus." And so we went to the airport with the 30 students, and our flight was canceled. And we saw all 30 of us as we're sitting there. One of our students needed medication. He had put it in his checked bag.
Oh no!
And so he passed out while we were sitting in the airport, because we were stuck in Vegas for about 10 hours. Finally, we were put on a flight, and it got us into Chicago Midway, not even O'Hare, Chicago Midway at about 1 a.m.
Oh boy!
And
But then there's no
to,
flights from Chicago Midway at 1 a.m.
We all slept on the floor or on chairs until 5:30 in the morning. I think no one ever looked more desperate than 30 students standing outside the McDonald's waiting for it to open in the Midway, terminal. But finally we made it home, but even that flight was delayed again. So that was probably the most annoying part, is just because I was in charge of 30 other people, and you ended up having to spend the night sitting in a chair in Midway, which not quite the way you want to do that.
No. Those airport chairs are never comfortable, and the armrests don't move.
No.
So you're just in a bad way, unless you're like a small child and you can slide underneath, and
Yeah,
you or I qualify.
There were a few. There definitely were a few students, college age students, who could just, put their legs in Indian style and put their head down on their lap and sit in a chair and be asleep for the whole night. But my body type is not that.
No, so. I hear you. I represent that remark, so I understand that. So now, how many of these choir tours did you do with the college in New York, and where did you go?
Well, I think we did 15 tours across 12 years that I was touring with the choir. So many years, maybe it was actually even more than that, but pretty much every other year we would go on 2 tours, one during spring break and one in May. And then the next year we would just do 1 tour. And these are all tours that churches hosted us. We would do fundraising at the churches. And many of those years we actually made back all the money that we would have spent on a tour bus. And if we had to fly somewhere, then that cost was on the students to fly there, but we were able to do that pretty cheaply because we did it well in advance. Let's just put it that way. So we were always prepared. And I think that's one of the most important things I've realized from all my touring is I would often know 15 months ahead every place I would be going in 15 months. So that helped me definitely be better at planning for the distances or concerns that I might have. And even if we had some travel delays, we only twice were we ever late for a concert out of 15 tours. And most of those tours were between 10 and 18 concerts. So that's
a good record.
Yeah, that's 150 to 200 and something concerts. And we went to 49 states. The only state we didn't do on tour was Alaska. And so I've been to every of the lower 48 states with the choir. We've been to both Quebec, and we were in Quebec, and we were also in Ontario in Canada as part of those tours. And we also went to Germany on 1 tour and there for 2 weeks. And then the Hawaii trip, that was just with my chamber choir. We were only on Oahu for a whole week. Every night we did a concert. Every day we were at the beach.
That's not a bad way to do it.
No, not at all.
Just, sound checking your flip-flops, I suppose, Yeah,
just make sure you're wearing suntan lotion at that point, because you're probably not used to the sun.
No, it is a more direct thing. There's no doubt when you get there. So, now when you were growing up, did your family take any memorable vacations that you remember, or was it just kind of the boring, mundane stuff like I was subjected to when I was a kid?
Oh yeah, we did lots of boring stuff. I mean, the thing is, we had one grandmother who lived in Colorado, Fort Collins, Colorado, and many summers we would spend 3 days driving from somewhere. I most of the time I remember driving from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, because I was born in Pittsburgh and lots of family there. So we would spend 3 days driving to Colorado and be out there for a couple of weeks, and then spend 3 days driving back. And my parents didn't believe in air conditioning or a car with automatic transmission or anything like that. So, it was mostly the windows rolled down in the old Nissan Sentra, seeing the hundreds of miles of I-80 go by in Nebraska, which you're kind of like, oh, that's there's nothing exciting in Nebraska on I-80. So
No, it's pretty flat and level. Unless you see a tornado in the distance, you're not going
right.
to have very much fun.
But probably instead of vacations, we actually, my father was a teacher, and he actually applied for a variety of fellowships that we got. And we lived in Scotland for a year when I was a kid in 7th grade. And he had a teacher exchange, a Fulbright teacher exchange. And so when we were in Scotland, that was quite neat. We actually were in Scotland for about 300 days. And we spent 40 of those traveling all over Scotland, Wales, and England.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah. So, we were up at Loch Ness for a week at a camp that my father was taking some students from the high school he was teaching at up there. So our whole family went up to Loch Ness, and that there's definitely a lot of fun with that. And we also lived in New York City for a year when I was a kid, 3rd grade, because my father had a fellowship at Columbia University. So I definitely lived in a lot of places. We moved around a lot when I was a kid. I lived in Pittsburgh, in Colorado, in Rochester, back in Pittsburgh, in Toledo. We lived in Scotland, in Toledo, lived in Chicago. So we lived in a variety of places. And to me, the most important part of traveling is to realize that the world is larger than our own views and our own experiences. And there's a lot of people who experience lots of different things, and that that's one, I think, part of how I've grown up to understand that I need to be understanding and tolerant of things that I maybe would not have ever thought about in living in New York or Pittsburgh or Chicago.
No, I think the authentic experiential travel experience is really important, and obviously living in different places will open your eyes. There's no doubt. Even when I spent one summer studying in Italy, it was an entirely different. It was an entirely different lifestyle. It was an entirely different. It was a whole different thing to live there and then watch the people and observe and learn the language and all of that. So I definitely understand that.
Yeah.
So it's true though, and the thing is, I think a more authentic travel experience is always one that you can cherish and have memories of more than say if you go to some sterile place that you might be used to.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
and listen, as nice as those places are, sometimes you still have to open the boundaries a little bit and push that envelope.
Well, I think an important part for me has been a lot of times I've been on these, especially when I was on choir tours, I was taking, college students with me who had many times the students who were from my college in New York had never been outside the tri-state area. I remember we would always stay in host families on our trips, but I was at one of the first nights of tour one year. I remember I was in a host family, and a couple other students were also there because there was a nice big house. And the host father said to one of our students, "Oh, so where have you lived? Where are you from?" And he's like, "I'm from New York." He's like, "Oh, well, where have you lived in New York?" He's like, "Oh, I've lived all over the place." He's like, "Oh, really? Where?" He's like, "I've lived in Manhattan and the Bronx and Queens and Brooklyn."
No, that doesn't quite qualify for all over New York. I mean, he hasn't even gotten out to the Nassau-Suffolk County border.
Yeah, and that was the thing. The host dad that's New York City, and he's like, "Oh," but that was that student's entire life had been in New York City.
Right.
He over 4 years of being in choir with me, that student actually explored about 25 different states, and I have a lot of students who connect back with me on Facebook or talk with me, and they say, when these little surveys come up on Facebook and it says, what states have you been in or where have you gone? They say, 90% of those is because I was in choir. And it's just really neat because when I would plan a tour, I would always make sure that we had some kind of educational purpose, or we had some way to connect to where we were going. So this probably comes from my father. When we went to Scotland, before we moved to Scotland, I was required to memorize Scottish poetry, know about Scottish foods so that I could identify them. I would have to know the different types of folk dancing, strathspeels and all these different things. And I had to learn some songs. And, I I've taken that with me almost everywhere I've ever gone. Is if I'm going to go somewhere, I want to learn something about where I'm going first, so that I can try to, for myself, experience an authentic uh, experience there. So know a food that I need to try, or know a restaurant or place that is famous that you can't miss. So for instance, we went to New Orleans a number of years ago on tour, and all we had in New Orleans was about 6 hours on this choir tour. But I had done a whole bunch of research about all the different foods. And so I said to students, I say, hey, you can go off on your own, but if you want to walk with me, I'll take you and we will eat every food that you have to eat in New Orleans. And so we walked around the French Quarter as a group of about 8 students and myself. And in each location, a different student bought the item that we were going to have, and we broke it into 8 pieces, and we all tasted it. And we went to the next store, the next location, and we just walked around the town for 4 hours, 5 hours, eating all the foods that you should eat in New Orleans, and talking a bit about the jazz musicians that were on the street and things like that. So I remember that wholeheartedly. I can remember eating muffalettas and po' boys and jambalaya and all these different things in New Orleans. And that's a neat way of traveling when you're thinking about what can I experience here that I can bring back and remember. I'm not very good at going on a vacation where I sit at the beach for 5 days. I'm kind of a person who goes on a vacation. I want to learn something or see something that I need to see. And so that's kind of my mindset when I was on choir tour with the choir, or even on my own.
No, I understand. I think doing sometimes is better. There are times you just need to relax and chill and have the fruity drink with the umbrella in it.
Yeah.
But there are other times, that you should be, like I say, more authentic and experiential and all this. Yeah. Well, it's been really fascinating stuff. I think we've learned a lot from you. Just if you want to plug that radio show one more time, because I know it's on the interwebs. Yeah. Go ahead and let people know about that.
Well, it's called Dakota Sings. And it happens, there's a Facebook page, Dakota Sings Facebook page, where anytime a new episode is going to come up, the episodes are actually on Prairie Public Radio, which is the public radio station of North Dakota. And so we have 2 episodes that have already happened, but you can go and check out the link to YouTube where the whole show is at. And I'll have 4 more shows coming up this spring that mostly focus on North Dakota choirs or composers. But I have a show coming up at the end of January, which is going to focus on the Grammy-nominated choir albums from this year, because one of the albums, the Kostalski Requiem, let's see if I can show that to you. The Kostalski Requiem is Grammy nominated, and I was one of the singers in the choir on that. So it's kind of exciting to think that at least at the moment I'm Grammy nominated, and there's a lot of hope for this CD to maybe win the Grammy for Best Choral Performance this year. So we'll be doing a show all about the Grammy nominated choral programs coming up shortly.
Well, knowing the Grammy committee, you never know. I mean, they did vote. They have voted some weird things in the past. The first, I think the first heavy metal band was Jethro Tull. So.
Yeah. Well, but it's also interesting that the groups that don't get in. There's a group called Capella Romana based out of Portland, and they have the #1 selling choral CD in the Billboard charts this entire year.
And they're not nominated. And guess what? It's not even like it's that mass hysteria pop music. So you think that the more, you think something like that might get a little bit more, support from these Grammy type people. But again, you just...
Yeah. The interesting part is they did a little episode about the Capella Romana CD on NPR. And it was reported at the end of 2020 that it was the single most listened to spot that they had on NPR the entire year, was this about this choir's CD. And it also then that CD then became the #1 selling choral CD in the world, more or less. And they weren't Grammy nominated. So
like I said, you can never figure out how people do things sometimes.
Right. Well, it's great to see you, Scott. I'm glad that you're putting this together, I think traveling is really important for us to be able to both relax and enjoy, but also learn more about the world around us. And I think it's
And when the dust settles, I'm sure travel will be back with a vengeance. I'm sure everyone will be chafing at the bit to go out and do something, you know?
Yes, definitely. I look forward to that possibility because I have lots of friends all over the place in Europe and all across the country. And it hurts to not be able to go see anybody at this point. So
I understand that. I'm with you there. Well, listen, Jason Thoms, thank you so much for being on board today. Again, this is a Walters Wanderings Travel Podcast. We'll see you next time for another edition.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.